This attack is very painful and wrong. I know that our battle is not against flesh and blood.
No one saw it coming. Not the fans, not the staff, not even those closest to her. When investigative journalist Julie Roys dropped her explosive report, everything changed overnight. What she revealed didn't just shake Daystar, it shattered its foundation. Within days, whispers turned into headlines. Joni Lamb is out. But why? What truth was so powerful it forced one of Christian television's biggest names to walk away? The answer left everyone in disbelief. Before the storm, before the headlines, before the questions, there was Joni Lamb, the woman everyone trusted. She wasn't just a television host. She was a familiar face in millions of living rooms, someone people felt they knew personally. When Joni spoke, her calm voice carried warmth and conviction. Viewers didn't just listen, they believed. Her words made people feel safe, as if faith itself had a human face. She could turn a Bible verse into comfort, a story into strength. Together with her husband, Marcus Lamb, Joni built Daystar from the ground up, a network that would soon become a beacon of hope for countless Christian families. It wasn't just about the programs, it was about connection. People prayed with her, cried with her, and found peace through her words. She wasn't distant like some television personalities. She was real, relatable, and always smiling. When she talked about faith, it felt personal. When she prayed, it felt like she was praying for you. When Marcus passed away, the world expected Joni to step back, to take time away from the spotlight. But she did the opposite. She stood taller, stronger, speaking about loss and perseverance in a way that touched hearts everywhere. People watched her walk through grief with grace and thought, this is what faith looks like in pain. Her courage made her even more loved. She wasn't just a host anymore, she became a living testimony, proof that you could survive heartbreak with hope. Her show, Joni Table Talk, became one of the most watched programs on Christian television. Guests opened up to her in ways they didn't elsewhere. She listened deeply, offering empathy, not judgment. She created a space where faith met honesty, where stories of redemption and recovery could inspire millions. To viewers, she wasn't just a broadcaster, she was family. In a world filled with celebrity scandals and fading authenticity, Joni's image shined even brighter. She seemed untouchable, unshakable, a woman of integrity standing on unmovable faith. People trusted her completely. They believed that behind the camera, she lived exactly what she preached. To many, she wasn't just a Christian leader, she was a symbol of what pure, steadfast belief could look like. But behind that polished image, small cracks were forming. Ones no one could see yet, but soon the whole world would. It started quietly, not with breaking news, not with a viral post, but with a feeling. Julie Roys, a journalist known for exposing corruption in Christian organizations, had a hunch that something about Daystar didn't add up. She had once been part of that world. From 2007 to 2011, she worked closely with Marcus and Joni Lamb, sitting in meetings, watching decisions being made, and seeing how the network operated behind the smiling faces and glowing lights. For years, she'd kept what she saw to herself, but whispers began to surface, whispers that Daystar wasn't as pure as it looked. Donations weren't always going where people thought. Money was moving in ways that didn't make sense. Julie couldn't ignore it anymore. At first, she thought it might be small, a few accounting mistakes or misunderstandings. But the deeper she looked, the more the puzzle pieces formed a disturbing picture. She started combing through public records, tax documents, and old financial statements. Then she began reaching out to people who used to work there. Some were nervous, afraid to talk. Others were ready, finally free to say what they'd been holding in for years. And as the stories came together, one theme stood out. Daystar had changed. It no longer felt like a ministry. It felt like an empire. One former employee told her about the private jet, a sleek, expensive aircraft bought entirely with donated money. Daystar had told viewers it was for ministry travel, for spreading the gospel around the world. But what Julie found suggested something more troubling. The jet wasn't just used for missions or preaching tours. It was also used for personal trips, luxury travel that regular donors could only dream of. She found records showing the plane was purchased not through profit, but through gifts sent by viewers, everyday people, many of whom gave sacrificially, trusting they were helping share the message of Christ. Some of those same donors were living paycheck to paycheck. That realization hit Julie hard. The thought that someone's grocery money, someone's last $20, might have paid for in-flight champagne was sickening. But the jet was only the beginning. Julie soon discovered that Daystar's financial secrecy ran much deeper. The network was registered as a church, a move that meant it didn't have to file public financial disclosures like most nonprofit organizations. There were no annual reports, no salary breakdowns, no expense records for donors to review. It was a legal loophole that allowed millions of dollars to move in and out of the ministry without public accountability. To Julie, that was the biggest red flag of all. She wasn't accusing anyone of a crime, but she was asking a simple question. If there's nothing to hide, why not show the books? The more she asked, the more resistance she met. Current staff members refused to talk, citing confidentiality agreements. Others hinted that anyone who questioned leadership risked losing their job. Loyalty comes first, one insider told her. If you speak out, you're seen as betraying the mission. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about control. Daystar, once known for its family atmosphere and prayerful community, had become a place where fear and silence ruled. Julie began to piece together testimonies, accounts of leaders traveling first class, staying in five-star hotels, and dining in luxury while urging viewers on air to sow seeds of faith by donating. One story haunted her the most. A former call center worker told her about an elderly woman who had phoned in during a telethon, crying as she gave her last $1,000 because she believed God would bless her tenfold. The worker remembered feeling sick, knowing that woman's sacrifice might end up funding another luxury trip. That moment, she said, was when she realized something sacred had been lost. As Julie continued her investigation, she also uncovered the network's increasing involvement in politics. Daystar wasn't just preaching faith, it was quietly backing specific candidates and hosting political rallies on its platforms. The IRS has strict rules for religious organizations, but Daystar seemed to be walking a fine line, even crossing it at times. The mission had shifted from saving souls to saving influence. Julie's findings painted a picture of a ministry that looked holy on the outside, but operated like a business behind the scenes. Former employees described an inner circle where power was centralized and questions were seen as disloyalty. They talked about the pressure to keep up appearances, how every broadcast, every event, had to maintain the illusion of divine blessing. Behind the smiles and scripture quotes, people were exhausted, burned out, and disillusioned. It stopped feeling like church, one worker said softly. It started feeling like television. When Julie finally published her expose, it spread like wildfire. The headlines were shocking. Lavish spending and hidden finances at one of America's biggest Christian networks. Viewers who had trusted Daystar for years couldn't believe what they were reading. Pastors who had once featured the Lamb family in their churches began distancing themselves. Donors demanded answers. How could a network that preached humility and stewardship live in such luxury? Joni Lamb responded quickly but cautiously. She called it a spiritual attack, insisting the ministry was being targeted because of its success. She spoke about standing strong in faith and trusting God to defend the truth. But what she didn't do was offer proof. There were no documents, no breakdowns, no transparent answers. The investigation wasn't just about money anymore. It had become about integrity and whether faith leaders should be held to the same standards of honesty they preached from the stage. For Julie Roys, it wasn't about revenge or sensational headlines. She said she simply wanted the truth to be known for the sake of those who had given their money, their prayers, and their trust. Real ministries don't fear accountability, she wrote. They welcome it. Her report didn't destroy Daystar overnight, but it cracked the foundation that Joni had built for decades. As the story gained traction, something shifted in Christian media. Viewers began asking harder questions, not just about Daystar, but about all ministries that operated in secrecy. The image of the flawless faith leader began to fade, replaced by a growing awareness that even the most beloved figures could fall. For Joni, it marked the beginning of a new chapter, one she hadn't written, one she couldn't control. And for millions who once trusted her without question, it was the first time they looked at her and wondered if they ever truly knew her at all. When the story broke, it hit like an earthquake. Julie Roy's investigation spread fast. From quiet church circles to national headlines, the woman who had once been called the First Lady of Christian television was now at the center of a scandal no one could ignore. For decades, people had watched Joni Lamb pray, preach, and cry with families in need. She was a part of their faith journey. So when words like lavish spending, hidden finances, and private jet appeared next to her name, it felt personal. It wasn't just disappointment, it was heartbreak. The first few days after the report came out were chaos. Social media turned into a storm. Fans, pastors, donors, everyone had an opinion. Some rushed to defend her, saying the enemy was attacking a faithful servant of God. Others felt betrayed, like their trust had been stolen. "I believed in her," one longtime viewer wrote. "Now I don't know what to believe anymore." The comments kept pouring in. Anger, sadness, disbelief. For a woman who built her career on connection, that sudden distance was devastating. Joni's first public statement came quickly. Sitting in her usual chair on the Daystar set, she looked straight into the camera, her voice calm but tight. "This attack is very painful and wrong," she said. "We know our battle is not against flesh and blood." It was a message meant to sound strong, spiritual, and unshaken. But for many watching, it didn't sound like transparency. It sounded like avoidance. She didn't mention the jet, the money, or the accusations directly. She didn't offer evidence to clear the doubts. Instead, she framed the entire situation as persecution, as if she were being tested by forces of darkness rather than held accountable by her supporters. At first, some viewers accepted that explanation. They prayed for her, believing she was under attack. But as the days turned into weeks, silence replaced reassurance. There were no documents released, no press conferences, no answers. Former employees began to speak up, confirming some of what Julie Roys had found. The cracks grew wider. Inside Daystar itself, whispers turned into worry. Staff who had once seen the ministry as family started questioning everything. People who had worked there for decades began quietly leaving. The hardest part for many wasn't the financial accusations, it was the emotional betrayal. Daystar had always been about trust. Joni wasn't a distant celebrity, she was someone viewers felt they could share their hearts with. When she prayed on television, it felt real. When she cried over tragedy, people cried with her. That bond was spiritual, not transactional. So when the image broke, it shook something deeper than reputation. It shook faith. People started questioning not just Joni, but themselves. How could they have missed the signs? Had they been naive? Was the faith they believed in being used to sell a lifestyle? Churches that had once aired Daystar began pulling back. Some pastors told their congregations they were re-evaluating partnerships. Others stayed silent, afraid of the backlash that might come with choosing sides. Behind closed doors, Christian leaders debated what to do. Supporting Joni looked risky. Condemning her felt cruel. Either way, the scandal was impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, the donations slowed. Telethons that once raised millions now struggled to reach goals. Loyal donors stopped calling. The phone lines were still open, but the voices on the other end were hesitant, uncertain. "We still love Joni," one woman told a call operator, "but we just don't know what's true anymore." That uncertainty, that quiet doubt, was more dangerous than anger. It was the slow erosion of trust, the kind that doesn't heal easily. Joni kept appearing on television, smiling, quoting scripture, talking about resilience. But the tone had changed. There was something different in her eyes, something tired. She was still performing, but the confidence wasn't the same. Every word she spoke was met with scrutiny. Every public appearance became a test. People began analyzing her clothes, her jewelry, her expressions, looking for signs of guilt or defiance. The woman who once commanded the camera now seemed trapped by it. What made things worse was her refusal to address the specific accusations. She could have ended much of the speculation with proof, receipts, audits, statements, but she didn't. Instead, she doubled down on faith, insisting that her joy and success were signs of divine favor. To her most loyal followers, that was inspiring. To everyone else, it felt like deflection. "She's hiding behind God," one former donor said. "She's using faith as a shield." The scandal grew beyond Daystar. Other Christian networks started quietly distancing themselves. Invitations to conferences dried up. Speaking engagements were canceled. Even her once close allies in ministry stopped returning calls. The walls that had once protected her now closed in. Daystar was still broadcasting, but the glow had dimmed. Viewership dropped, ad revenue declined, and internally, morale was at an all-time low. Then came the most painful blow. the division among believers themselves. Families that used to watch Daystar together argued about whether to keep supporting it. Friends unfollowed each other online. Some churches split over it, with half believing Joni was being unfairly attacked and half demanding accountability. The very community she had spent decades uniting under faith was now divided because of her. Through it all, Joni held her head high in public, but those close to her said the toll was heavy. Nights spent scrolling through criticism online, messages from people she once called friends now avoiding her. She told those around her that she was standing firm in God's grace, but the cracks showed. The confident woman who once preached about integrity now looked like someone fighting to hold on to it. As months passed, the story lost some of its noise, but the damage remained. The trust that had been built over decades couldn't be rebuilt with a few speeches or Bible verses. For many, Joni's fall wasn't about money. It was about truth. It was about realizing that sometimes the people who seem most unshakable are the ones standing on the weakest ground. By the time the dust settled, Daystar still stood, but smaller, quieter, and changed forever. Joni still spoke on air, still smiled for the camera, still said, "God is good." But for many who had once adored her, something had shifted that could never be undone. The faith they had placed in her had turned into caution. The trust they once felt had turned into distance. And for the first time in her long, shining career, Joni Lamb wasn't leading the story. She was the story. It didn't happen overnight. The fall of Joni Lamb's once untouchable image came slowly, almost painfully, like watching a light fade that you never thought could dim. For years, she had been the face of faith on television, polished, calm, full of grace. People didn't just admire her, they believed in her. She was the voice that comforted them during illness, grief, and loss. To question Joni felt almost wrong, but the reckoning came anyway, unstoppable and raw. When the first wave of Julie Roy's investigation hit, most people thought it would pass. Scandals come and go in Christian media, and Joni had weathered storms before. But this was different. The details were too specific, the evidence too strong, and the silence from Daystar too long. The story began to spread beyond church circles, reaching people who had never watched her shows but recognized her face. For the first time, the woman who once seemed beyond criticism was being dissected, debated, and doubted in public. The image she had spent decades building, that of a faithful servant, a humble leader, a woman of unshakable moral strength, began to crack. The charm that once made her relatable now looked rehearsed. Her smiles seemed tight, her eyes weary. Each time she appeared on screen, people no longer saw inspiration. They saw questions. Was she genuine? Did she know about the money? Was this really all God's plan, or something more human, more flawed? Inside Daystar, the atmosphere shifted too. Staff who had once adored her started whispering in private. Some defended her fiercely, others quietly packed their desks. The fear that had always existed, the unspoken rule to never question leadership, began to fade. People were tired of pretending everything was fine. Reports of internal conflict leaked online, making the ministry's problems even more public. Joni tried to ignore it, focusing on her broadcasts, but the tension was everywhere. Her next on-air appearance after the scandal should have been a chance to clear the air. Instead, it made things worse. She spoke about attacks from the enemy, about staying faithful through trials, but she didn't address the specifics. No mention of finances, no open apology, no evidence of change. To her loyal supporters, it sounded like strength. To everyone else, it sounded like denial. The more she spoke in circles, the more people began to see her, not as a victim, but as a leader refusing accountability. The criticism grew harsher. Online forums, Christian blogs, and even mainstream news outlets began questioning how much of her career had been built on illusion. Old clips resurfaced, her preaching about humility, honesty, and transparency, now used against her. The very words that once inspired millions became reminders of what she'd failed to live up to. Joni, the woman who had once symbolized integrity, was now being called a hypocrite. The fallout extended beyond her reputation. Donations plummeted. Churches pulled Daystar from their networks. Invitations to speak disappeared. Former allies in ministry avoided her calls. Even her own family began to distance themselves publicly, each statement or silence adding fuel to the growing fire. The Lamb name, once associated with faith and family, was now a brand in crisis. For Joni, the reckoning was personal. Behind the cameras, those close to her said she struggled deeply. The criticism cut her to the core. She felt misunderstood, betrayed, even persecuted. But what she couldn't see, or maybe refused to see, was that this wasn't persecution. It was consequence. People weren't angry because she was human. They were angry because she'd built her platform on honesty and then refused to practice it when it mattered most. There were moments when the mask slipped. During one live broadcast, her voice trembled as she spoke about grace and forgiveness. For a brief second, she seemed real again, vulnerable, broken, human. But the moment passed, and the familiar composure returned. It was as if she couldn't let herself be anything less than perfect, even when perfection was the very thing that destroyed her. By the end of it all, the reckoning had stripped away the illusion. The woman once seen as untouchable was suddenly exposed, not as a monster, not as a villain, but as someone who had believed her own image too deeply. The ministry survived, but smaller. The viewers remained, but fewer. The faith was still there, but it no longer looked the same. Joni continued to speak about redemption, about second chances, and maybe she truly believed in them. But the world watching her had changed. The trust that once felt like worship had turned into quiet skepticism. She had built her legacy on the promise that faith and truth could walk hand in hand. But when the truth finally came, it walked alone. And that was the real tragedy of Joni Lamb's fall. It wasn't that she failed. Everyone fails. It was that she tried so hard to hide it. In doing so, she proved the one lesson her audience never expected to learn from her, that even the brightest lights in the church can cast the darkest shadows when they forget that faith without honesty isn't faith at all.